Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's nice to see friends and colleagues and a couple of cousins in the audience. Um, so um, I'm going to be talking about my book, At Home with the Aztecs, which won the award from the Society for American Archaeology for Best Popular Book of the Year in 2017. So I want to talk a little bit about how this book came about. I had a sabbatical and I was going to write a book to synthesize the excavations that Cindy, my wife, and I had done in the Mexican state of Morelos. And I was going to write a standard scholarly book for an academic publisher. And then I realized that, if I did that, more than half of what was in the book had already been published, because I'd published a lot of articles and site reports and things, and it would add something new, but a lot of it would already have existed in the published literature. So I thought, what if I write for a popular audience? I thought that'd be fun, a new challenge. I thought Norton Press, that would be ideal. So I go to the website for Norton Press, and it says, we don't deal with authors, we only deal with agents. I thought, agents, man, what's that all about? So how do you find an agent? Well, you go online and, there's websites. Agents have websites. There's instructions how to find an agent, what to do, and lists of agents and what they work on. And so I made up my little, descriptions that they wanted and sent it around. And I got lots of rejection letters. This is not commercial enough. Nah, not interested. I don't care about this. Finally, one agent, Barbara Braun, who was in an earlier life an art historian, worked in Mesoamerica. But Barbara said, I like the concept for your book. It says, but you're going to have to work on your writing. It says, your writing is clear, but not vivid. Now, I thought that's pretty good for an academic. Many of my colleagues can't even put two sentences together without it getting confusing. So, but not quite good enough for prime time. And so I engaged the services of a writing coach, a writing mentor. This was someone who worked with me. She didn't rewrite my prose. She taught me how to write in a narrative fashion. And it's a very different kind of writing. And we went through and I tore the whole thing apart, the whole manuscript apart, and put it back together. And then at that point, Barbara Braun says, okay, I'll sign a contract. I just want to illustrate the difference. I picked up this Aztec city-state capitals, came out in 2007. So here's the first line in the book. Aztec cities built in central Mexico between the 12th and 15th centuries AD were political capitals designed and built by kings to show off and reinforce their power, their wealth, and their legitimacy. Now, that's okay, but that's not exactly gonna grab someone who's not already interested in Aztec cities. So here's the first line of At Home with the Aztecs, chapter 1. The first sign that something was wrong was when a student excavator called me over to see what looked like rusty nails she had just excavated from an Aztec house. So you can see the difference. The second one draws you in, and now you want to know, well, what's wrong with that? What's the mystery and what's going on? So let me see how we're doing this. So one of the features of this book, it's damn well written, if I do say so myself. I dropped $2,000 on a writing coach, and it is really well written. And it's very well illustrated. I got a bunch of illustrations by an artist, Kagan MacLeod, who did these reconstruction scenes, and they're just really nice. I really like them a lot. So the book tells three stories. It tells about the Aztec households and communities whose remains Cindy and I excavated in Mexico. It's about doing archaeology in Mexico. How do we find sites? How do we excavate sites and things like that? And it's about our family and raising our kids in Mexico. So the Aztecs have an image problem. I mean, people tend to think of, human sacrifice or empires in war and conquest. And not that, they did sacrifice, and they did have war and conquest, but there's a lot more to Aztec society. And the written sources we have on the Aztecs. Most of what you will read about the Aztecs, any place, is from the written record, not the archaeological record. But the written sources are highly biased. They're about the 1%. They're about kings and elites, nobles. And if we want to know about the 99% average Aztec people, there's very little in the written sources. We have to go to archaeology. So one of the main written sources, Sahagún, is considered one of the best sources on Aztec society. Here's what he says about farmers. The farmer is bound to the soil. He works the soil, prepares the soil. He weeds, he broadcasts seeds, he gathers the maize. That's ridiculous. I mean, any idiot could say that about a farmer. You know, you don't have, that's not insightful. That doesn't tell us very much. If we want to learn about Aztec farmers, we have to go excavate their houses, their fields, and so on. So that's part of what we were doing. You know, there's old time monumental archaeology and in the good old days, opening King Tut's tomb or digging the pyramids. On the lower left is Persepolis in Iran. And, you know, that's going after big monuments and goodies, bringing back goodies to museums illegally a lot of the time. Now, monumental archaeology, in terms of digging big monuments, still goes on. Here's a Maya tomb being opened on the right, and excavations near the pyramids in Egypt on the left. Of course, there's also Indiana Jones archaeology, right? Going after goodies that you can steal and take back to a museum. And then there's social archaeology, which means studying the way of life of people, digging their houses and their communities. And so here's a Aztec house at the site of Teotihuacan. And it's not as exciting as digging big pyramids and tombs, if that's, you know, if you want fancy stuff. But if you want to learn about the past and what life was like, this is what you have to do. At the bottom is a reconstruction from Scientific American of their author, of their artist, of what a market would look like. And so Cindy and I went to Mexico. Here we are horsing around with some vessels. Any museum professionals in the crowd will probably be appalled that we're goofing around like this with Aztec pots. But you know, we spent quite a few years raising our kids in Cuernavaca, Mexico. And we had a political cartoonist working for us one time. We hired him in the lab, and he did this cartoon. You know, a lot of people in Mexico, they think we're looking for treasure. They just don't believe that we're, you know, looking for potsherds and things. They think we want to find gold. And so he did a little cartoon of Cindy's found the treasure. There I am with a magnifying glass and a map, being clueless, and she's already found the treasure. You know, so maybe that the idea that she's already figured it out is valid, but we're not looking after treasure, or we're looking for treasure of a different sort. So here's central Mexico. Mexico City is underneath Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital there in the center of the image. And we're talking about this area down here. It's the modern state of Morelos, and major sites that I'll be talking about, Quechcomate and Yautepec. So the first excavations, Quechcomate and Capilco, we want to know what was life like in rural areas. And also, what were the effects of Aztec conquest? When the Aztec Empire conquered this area, what, you know, how much of an impact did it have? We had some assumptions at the start, at least I did, that turned out to be wrong. I thought that Aztec peasants, these farmers, would be poor and isolated and downtrodden, heavily exploited, and that turned out to be incorrect. So one of the reasons we picked these sites, they had been discovered by Ken Hirth when he was doing work at Xochicalco. This is right down the hill from Xochicalco. I noticed that Claudia Alvarado is in the audience, who's done a lot of work at Xochicalco. Ken had found these sites. He didn't care about them because they were Aztec period. He was looking for epiclastic remains contemporaneous with Xochicalco. But I thought this was good. Now, can you see the house here? We're clearing off the house. Well, basically what you have is there's a stone alignment and a pile of rubble. And the reason we picked these sites was you could see these houses on the surface. You could see where the houses were, which meant we could go in. We didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out where the houses were. we could use we used random sampling to pick what houses to excavate, and so we tested quite a few houses. We tested, I don't know, on the order of 40 or 50 houses. That's a 2x2 test pit across a wall. There's a stone floor in the interior of the house on the left, and then the exterior area. We also did test pits outside of houses looking for middens, trash deposits. We used phosphate testing to locate where to put those. And then some of them we expanded into complete house excavations, like these two houses on the left there. So the first mystery that started off the book was the students said that we have iron nails. They weren't nails at all. Well, look, they're sort of copper looking. And the next idea was maybe they're copper wire, and they should not have been copper wire because these were Aztec deposits before the Spanish conquest. There should not be copper wire. Copper, yes, bronze perhaps, but not copper wire. But it turns out these things are, oh, look, they're sewing needles. There's a little, you can see the little eye on the right-hand side there. And these were found, I was actually quite surprised to find bronze artifacts. Well, first I thought they're just copper, but they turned out to be bronze in peasant households. This was an advanced technology in ancient Mexico. Most bronze objects have been found in offerings, in temples, or in the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. And to find these in a rural area I found very surprising. But we had Dorothy Hosler come down and analyze the metal. And yes, it is bronze. It's a copper alloy with tin or arsenic. And so that was the first mystery. There were no iron nails. There was no copper wire. There were bronze sewing needles. These are the two sites we were excavating, the village site of Capilco on the right, and Cuescomate is a town. There's about 150 houses. There's a plaza there where the letter B is, elite residences, and an area of check dams. This is what one of the houses looked like. This my wife Cindy excavated this house. Deposits were very shallow. What we've cleared down to what was the Aztec ground surface, just a few inches below the modern surface. And a couple pits here you see we've gone down further. Stone walls, double rows of stone floor in the middle, and you can see some of the stones had fallen down on the outside. There's a lot of stones in the background and a wall. So I was wondering, what were these houses built of? Did the stone walls go all the way up, or were they something else? So we were sitting around talking about this. There's Cindy with her crew of excavators. We had Mexican students, and our conversations at lunch would be in English and Spanish and back and forth. And we're talking about what were these walls made of. And the older guy here, Angel, the guy next to Cindy in the picture, said, any idiot knows these were the foundation walls for adobe brick walls. And I thought, oh, well, okay, we haven't found adobe bricks because they deteriorated, but how do you know this? I said, well, when we build an adobe house, we build foundation walls that look precisely like the walls of the structures we were excavating. So we did a little ethnoarchaeology. We watched this guy build his house. In fact, he thought it was a good deal because he needed to build an adobe house for his father, and he asked for time off for the excavations, and if we could hire him back after a month after he'd gotten the house done. And I said, well, if you will let us watch what you're doing and take measurements and photographs and ask a bunch of stupid questions, I'll keep you on the payroll. He thought that was the best deal he'd heard because he got paid for building the house. But these stones are the same as in the Aztec houses. There's mud mortar. He's not using anything there that the Aztecs didn't have, except there's a carpenter's level. Our kids, there's daughters April and Heather on Easter on the right there. On the left is Heather's first boyfriend. She wants him to do something, and Fermin is going, no quiero. So the second mystery was stone walls. These are these sort of rough stone walls running across countryside, all over the place. And they turned out to be agricultural terraces. And some were standard hill slope terraces parallel, running along the slope, the contour lines. And these are called check dams, or cross-channel terraces. And there's a whole line of them in a ravine just on the edge of Quescomate there. And you can see what they look like on the lower photograph here. And on the top is my bad graphic to show. Basically, you had a ravine with a seasonal stream at the bottom. And by building the wall across it, it traps soil and builds up the planting surface. And so what you've done is created a level surface that could be planted in an area that previously was just a slope and couldn't be farmed at all. The water's going down to the right. And this is what one of them looked like after we excavated it, the profile. Now people go look at that and go, well, how did that wall stand up if it's sloping like that? Well, it was never a freestanding wall. Here's my cheesy graphic to show you how this worked. The water's going down to the right. You put some stones in, the farmer puts some stones in, and sediments build up behind the rocks. And periodically, over a period of a couple of years, you add more stones each year, and the field builds higher and deeper soil. But as it goes up the ravine, the size, the area of the field increases as well. And so after some time, you have built quite a substantial field there. And then this is an example of the process of agricultural intensification, putting effort into building up fields to improve your production. Most of our excavations were not of the terraces, but were of houses. And we were particularly interested in the middens. We did excavate, and tested the houses themselves, the architecture, but the trash deposits that were behind the house were of particular interest. Those of us who excavate households, we love trash, not necessarily smelly modern trash like this. And I think this is Naples. I got this off the internet, this photo, but I think this is Naples. It must have been a garbage strike or something. But after hundreds of years, this is what our trash looks like. These are potsherds, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of potsherds at these sites. And it's washed, so it's not icky garbage anymore. But there's an awful lot of pieces that have to be counted and weighed and sorted into different categories. So here we are. On the right is Ruth Fowman Fishman, who is organizing spindle whorls. Everything okay?
Yep.
Yeah. She's measuring spindle whorls in our lab in Yautepec. The site of Quescomate had an elite residence. It just looked like some mounds on the photograph there. But after excavating, it was a palace of a probably a low-ranking noble. We also excavated some features we called rock piles, which were piles of rocks. These occurred in a number of the patio groups at Quescomate, and what we think they were deposits from the Aztec New Fire ceremony. The Aztec calendar repeated every 52 years. It was like a century. And the written sources say that at the end of 52 years, at one of the end of the cycle, we don't know which cycle, the world is going to be destroyed. And that everybody would throw out all their goods. And here's a photograph of someone throwing out all their household goods. And they'd put out all their fires and wait. And if the Pleiades rose and then the sun rose, then we're cool for another 52 years. And that's what we think these rock piles were, because they're very dense deposits of large sherds and other objects. Large sherd there on the lower left, that deposit was this thing, which is one of the weirdest pots ever excavated. It took me a couple of years to figure out what the heck this was. It looks like a jar, but Aztec jars don't have bases, and there's a hole in the side. What would it be? Turns out it's a drum. You would tie the skin head on top, and the hole is for the sound to come out. And the Aztecs had a variety of musical instruments, flutes and whistles you see here. These are from offerings in Mexico City. but we excavated the remains at the houses. Households had flutes here, they had whistles, they had rattles, they all had musical instruments. Um, when I first told, I had a German expert in musical instruments come work with us. When I first told him about it, says you can't have musical instruments. They're only found in temples and in major offerings in Tenochtitlan. I said, well, look at this. I got hundreds of them. And he said, I got to see those. So he came over and studied them, Ajay both. So how did they have sort of this sort of high quality of life that they were able to have music at home? And the basis of that is cotton. They grew cotton. We've documented the presence of cotton at the sites, and cotton textiles were a form of money. And here's a woman hand spinning cotton in the Codex Mendoza. And there's two of these artifacts will survive. They're made of ceramics, fired clay, spindle whorls, the weights, and the little bowls. And we excavated lots of these in domestic contexts. The weights, and then the bowls, you can see the bottoms of the bases of the bowls have wear patterns where the spindle was twirling. So if you're making cotton at home, it's like you're printing dollar bills on your printer, only it wasn't illegal. It was not illegal to make cotton, but if you could grow cotton and produce cotton cloth at home, you're certainly doing yourself a favor economically. A few other things that we found, bark beaters. These are basalt things about the size of a cigarette pack, and they make a form of paper. Today, the same kind of paper is made, bark paper. It's painted with birds and flowers and sold to tourists. These are pretty common. We also had what we call BBBs, bark beater blanks, is it like in the lower right there? It's a they had set up to make a bark beater, but hadn't put the grooves on it yet. Lots of cooking tools, cooking pots, comals, tortilla griddles, bean pots. And one of the interesting things is that a lot of this material culture for food production is very similar to what's used today during fiestas in the villages where our workers are from. So there's Cindy learning how to make tortillas on a clay griddle on a fire. And many of the things in this photograph, this is for a fiesta. This is not every day, but for many of the things here are almost the same as what we excavated at the site. And the people at the sites 500 years ago were the ancestors of the people living in these villages today. I mean, the beer bottles didn't exist in the past. The metal tortilla press didn't, plastic buckets, but the ceramic vessels, cooking on a 3-stone hearth. There's a metate stone grinder. And so a lot of the material culture, there's continuity at the level of the household and food production. We were involved in the activities in this village. We became compadres with a number of people, and in this case, there's a wedding. We helped out. We ended up buying the wedding dress, and there's our daughter Heather helping out in the wedding. And so here's a start. One of the things that my writing coach said, and the agent too, is you need more stories. And when I started out to write the book, I thought, if I start telling stories, that's all I'll do. So I didn't put a lot of stories in them. We need stories. We need stories. So I added some stories, and I asked our kids, hey, do you have any stories? And we found out some things we didn't know at the time. And one of them has to do with water here. This was before bottled water was really widely available, and we were constantly boiling water. I mean, we had for drinking water, for cooking, we were in the field, we needed water to drink, and just all the time water was boiling. And the kids, only drink bottled water, brush your teeth with bottled water, close your mouth in the shower. This was a major thing in our life. And at one point, the kids were really sick. Both girls were really sick. They just, some kind of gastrointestinal issue. And Heather was so sick, she could hardly move. And instead of taking her to her pediatrician who was across town, we went to the pediatrician down the street. I remember carrying her there and feeding her Pedialyte with a spoon and everything. And we never figured out why they were so sick. And so when writing this book and asking the kids for, hey, tell us some stories, and they said, remember that time we were real sick? Yeah. Well, we were drinking water from the hose. And I sort of, well, why'd you do that? We're constantly talking about this and why'd you do that? Says, well, because we weren't supposed to. So now here's something that archaeologists get asked quite a bit. What's the most spectacular find you've ever made? All right, you're sitting on an airplane. Did I used to fly on airplanes? God, it's been a long time. You meet someone, an archaeologist, how interesting. What's the most spectacular? They want to hear you say, I found an army of terracotta warriors at my site, or a gold sarcophagus. I used to hate getting questions like that. I do household archaeology. I get potsherds and pieces of obsidian. I don't find this kind of thing. But then I sort of realized that, well, these are the most exciting things I've found. These bronze sewing needles. They're not going to go to some fancy museum and people are going to go ooh and ah, but in terms of learning about life in the past, wow, Nadia, hello, Nadia. In terms of learning about the past, they tell us about people's activities and about the sewing cotton into garments. This was an advanced technology from Mesoamerica. So they tell us about bronze working. And these things were made in West Mexico and traded into Central Mexico. Not only were they traded long distances, they made their way to rural farms, to rural farm households. And so the amount of things we learn about life in the past from these bronze sewing needles is really quite incredible. So for me, this is the most spectacular thing I've ever found, is these needles. So these peasants were prosperous and successful. This was sort of unexpected. And so one of the things I do in the book is try to figure out, well, how can we describe that conceptually? And I use the concept of quality of life from the Nobel-winning economist Amartya Sen. And for Sen, quality of life has two components: wealth and capabilities, that you can function and exercise your human capabilities, that you have the wherewithal to do what you want to do. And how can we do this archaeologically? Well, wealth is not too hard to study archaeologically, but what about capabilities? And so I settled on diversity of possessions and external social networks. And these are things that the people at these sites really had. Diversity of possessions. Suppose you were a woman who was doing to do a curing ceremony. Okay, the women were the main curers, and here's a woman in a codex. What could she use in her ceremony? She could use ceramic figurines. She could use incense burners, a different kind of incense burner. She could use stamps. She could use a lot of different things in a ceremony. She had choices to do this. It wasn't like, well, we're going to do a ceremony, we have to pull out this one thing. They had a lot of quartz crystals, a carved cup, a parrot head. This is from a tobacco pipe. And this was long before, Jimmy Buffett and the parrot heads of Margaritaville. But the point is, a woman doing a ceremony had lots of opportunities, lots of choices of ways to do it. Another aspect of these external connections. Lots of imports, imported ceramics, imported obsidian. Here's Kagan's drawing of a possible marketplace. Another thing is style networks. They had access to styles throughout Central Mexico. So the figurines we had hundreds of these things used in household ceremonies. On the top left, these were imports from the Valley of Mexico. But in the center group, they look just like the ones from the Valley of Mexico, but they're locally made. The clays are local, and we found molds. And the lower right is our local style. But the point is, people at these sites knew what the styles were throughout Central Mexico and had access to a variety of things. So there's conquest by the Aztec Empire around 1440. How did conquest affect provincial peoples? Well, didn't have a big effect. The elite compound was replaced by a smaller compound, minor changes. People had to pay imperial taxes. Well, yeah, we have these tax documents. The Aztec, this is the Codex Mendoza, told what taxes people are paying. So they're paying taxes to the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. What did people get in exchange for their imperial taxes? Sounds like something you asked today. What am I getting for my taxes? What do these provincial people get? Not much. The Aztec Empire was a protection racket. The Aztec Empire was like the mafia. Basically, it was an indirect empire, which means they didn't send out governors and armies and officials. They basically said, make your payments and I won't break your leg. The Aztec, it was a hands-off, indirect control empire, and they didn't get much benefit out of being it. They just had to pay their taxes. All right, so this next project was in Yautepec. This is an urban site. We thought, oh, urban life will be very different from rural life, and we wanted to know about urban society and, again, the effects of Aztec conquest on a different area. In Yautepec, there was a great big mound, and it was started to be excavated by a group from the INA, the Anthropology Institute in Mexico, and turned out to be a royal palace for the king of Yautepec. Yautepec was a city-state capital. And so they were excavating this, and the archaeologists said, Cindy and I were just finishing up the artifacts from the earlier project, sort of looking around, what are we going to do next? And so why don't you come to Yautepec and dig houses? Then we'll have 2 projects going and we'll learn a lot more. So we thought, okay. So we went and we spent the first summer, this was 1992, doing a survey in Mexico. When we're going to start at a site, they usually require that you first spend a season doing mapping and surface work, and then you start excavating the next season. So we were collecting artifacts here in a 2x2 square. We're walking throughout the town with air photos, looking for remains. And then we went back up. We were living in Albany at the time, so we went back to Albany for the fall semester, planning to come down in January of 1993 to excavate. And pretty soon after we left, well, this is where we had planned to excavate. It was an official archaeological zone. It was next to that royal palace, and it basically had cows and stinging ants in it. But to be able to excavate houses in the center of an Aztec city was quite attractive. But then after we left, whoops, this is what happened. Basically, the whole archaeological zone was filled with squatters. They set up little shacks, and they're called, in Mexico, it was a planned invasion. They're called paracaidistas, parachuters. And basically people in town wake up one morning and these fields are full of shacks. And given the nature of land tenure laws in Mexico, it's hard to evict people once they've set up shacks like this. Blue shows the palace area. The yellow is the formerly open field. This is where we had planned to excavate, and it was just filled in with squatters. We were able to excavate in several places. A schoolyard on the top there, the red area. The red area on the right was owned by a guy who raised fighting bulls, but luckily he didn't raise fighting bulls on that particular lot. So we found places to excavate in Yautepec, obviously within the modern city there. So in the schoolyard, here's a house we dug, stone platform, had a bunch of burials and features around it. Here's another unit, 506. This is right across the stone wall from the squatters, or the brick wall from the squatters settlement. One wall of this house hadn't survived because of plowing, but the other walls did. Very dense middens just to the east of this structure. While we were excavating in here, the squatters, the paracaidistas, got active, and they were marching on the capital in Cuernavaca and demanding services. And the Anthropology Institute was trying to get rid of people, but they couldn't. And we were in the news. This was a big thing in the news. Rebellion of paracaidistas, up against the wall, invaders of the archaeological zone. We were interviewed quite a bit. Here's a Sue Norris, a student trying to map while there's a TV crew. We were on Mexican 60 Minutes, 60 Minutos. I was interviewed quite a bit. and I had to be careful what I said. You know, they'd say, have these people, are they living on top of the archaeological zone? Yes. Are these important deposits? Yes. Are they harming the deposits? Yes. Should they kick them out? No comment. You wanted to avoid the headline that said, Gringo wants to kick people out of their houses. And I managed to avoid that. But it was an issue. And at one point, a couple of the people from the protesters jumped over the wall. They threatened Sue here, and they threatened her workers. And they said, if you keep working for the Gringos, we're going to beat you up. And so some of the workers went down to the local political party, the PRI, and word got through to the governor that the archaeologists were being threatened. And the governor sent the state police to guard us. And these are guys in bright blue uniforms with shotguns. And they stood around bored for a while, and then we put them to work excavating. So we got the state police helping at the screen and helping dig. When we moved on to other parts of Yautepec, we declined police protection. We were always very careful, but we never really had any incidents, any violence against the crew or anything. The kids in Yautepec, April tried screening. She wasn't thrilled with it, as you can see. There's Heather and pals, a couple of sets of cousins that lived near the lab there. We drove them to, they went to day camp every day and in the summer, and I drove them in the back of the truck to camp and I picked them up. Well, one time I forgot to pick them up. We had a burial. I don't know what we did. We had a burial, something going on, and I just completely forgot. And I didn't pick them up. So they took the bus, and we had told the girls, you can't take the bus. Don't take the bus. It's not safe. Well, to their, friends here, you take the bus all the time. It's not a big deal. So they took the bus. It was a big adventure. And they got home just fine, but I still hear today, our daughters, they're grown up, they have kids, we have grandkids, and I still hear from them, you forgot to pick us up from day camp. Yeah. Here's a house in the street, literally in the street, found by a public works crew, and they were grading the road. And they got into an argument. The public works crew got into an argument about whether the floor they uncovered was a modern cement pavement or an ancient pavement, and it turned out to be an Aztec floor, basically. The houses were almost the same as in the rural area. We found very little difference between sort of rural and urban areas in the houses and in the ways of life. We had lots of lectures to school groups because we had major excavations within the secondary school on the lower right here. We also dug on the property of a primary school on the left there. So lots of lectures to kids. Here's our lab, a house in Yautepec where they basically let us use a bunch of upstairs rooms to store our artifacts and to work on them. So major finding that in Yautepec, the commoners were also prosperous and well-connected like they had been at the rural sites. Then we had the question, well, how can we measure this kind of success and prosperity at the community level? Before I talked about household quality of life, and now what about the community level? This is what the town of Capilco would have looked like. Well, one aspect of this is collective construction projects done by the people of the town that benefit the entire settlement. So we have the terraces, we have a diversion ditch there. This was sort of keeping water off the village of Capilco. Here's some of Kagan's drawings of terracing and clearing out a canal. Another aspect is continuity of residences. Each bar here is a house that we excavated and could date. And at the bottom is the early periods, at the top is the late periods. And what this shows is that once a house was occupied, it was continuously occupied, in most cases, until the Spanish conquest. All right, that's what the end of the imperial period is, 1519, the Spanish conquest. Only two structures here, two elite houses at Cuescomate, were abandoned before the Spanish conquest. And the Yautepec several continued after the Spanish conquest. But the point is, there was a lot of continuity in the residences, which suggests a sort of prosperous community. And these were long-lasting communities. Capilco lasted 450 years. Cuescomate was founded later, lasted 250 years till the Spanish conquest. And Yautepec, 900 years, they're still going strong. Yautepec continued as a community through in the Spanish colonial period up to the present. And another is resilience to conquest. The Aztec conquest had very little effect on any of these communities. And so in that sense, these people were resilient to Aztec conquest, but they were not at all resilient to the Spanish conquest. Capilco and Quechcamate were wiped out. They were abandoned shortly after the Spanish conquest. Yautepec was strongly affected by the Spanish conquest, but some households continued on. We had a house at Yautepec, and in the colonial period, the basic ceramics and obsidian artifacts were very similar to in the Aztec period, but then we had horse bones and cow bones and iron nails, and glazed pottery and things like that. So how to explain the success of these households and communities? Well, one more piece of evidence is needed, and I have it right here in this box. So I'll give you a minute to read this. If you can read this, let me know. I can't. This is Nahuatl. These are documents written in Nahuatl, and yeah, my dirty little secret. I'm an Aztec specialist, but I can't read Nahuatl. But luckily, a lot of this stuff has been transcribed and translated. But there are documents from this part of Mexico, from the state of Morelos, that that describe households and communities, and they point to the importance of the Calpulli. The Calpulli is a community in Aztec Mexico. In a rural area, it will be a village. So the village of Capilco corresponded to a Calpulli. Within cities, a Calpulli was a neighborhood. Yautepec was probably divided into quite a few Calpullis. And here's some illustrations from Sahagún. There's a Calpulli temple, a school. There's dad dropping the kids off. The guy with the kind of a net cape thing is the teacher. And, you know, it looks like you're dropping your kids off at school today. And but the Calpulli, the land was typically owned by a noble. People didn't own their own, the farmers didn't own their own plots, but the noble left the running of agriculture and Calpulli business to the Calpulli council. And so they could decide how to allocate land and what to do. As long as they were paying their rent and their taxes, they could do what they wanted. And so the Calpulli gave these households and communities local control and flexibility. And that's what these documents tell us. The sort of success and prosperity of these communities and households. Archaeology tells us about the resources. It tells us about economic networks. And the documents tell us about flexible organization and local control. And if you want more technical stuff on this quality of life, I wrote this article. And this is another interesting thing about the writing of this book. I had done the site reports, I had published articles, and so almost everything I wrote in this book, At Home with the Aztecs, is based on technical stuff that I've already published. And you know, and I cite it. So if you want to go find out the details, like how many needles do we find, and what was the composition of arsenic, that's all we have that. But this whole thing on quality of life and prosperity, I hadn't really worked out. I really worked out these ideas while writing the book. And so that part of the book, the writing wasn't as good because I'm sort of in scholarly mode and I've got to say this right. And I've got to be cut, you know, I've got to cross all the T's and dot all the I's and get all the details. And it really didn't fit within the book. And I thought, I have to publish this as a scholarly article first, and then I can go back and write about it in a narrative fashion for a general audience. And so I did it. This paper is the article I went and wrote, and I could finish the book. You know, and I don't know if some of you are aware of the book that's been very popular these days, The Dawn of Everything by Graeber and Wengrow. And one of the problems with that book is they didn't go out and write the technical stuff first. They tried to put the technical stuff into a popular book, and it's full of problems. Anyway, I'm getting too far afield. But anyway, I had to get the details down in a scholarly fashion to satisfy myself, and then I could sort of go back and write about things in a more general fashion. So this book, the basic messages of this book, the Aztecs were not sacrificial maniacs. I'm trying to humanize the Aztec peoples in the book to show that archaeologists can reconstruct ancient households and communities, and to show that these people, their households, communities, had successful and sustainable ways of life. So you can buy this book. Yeah, shameless advertising. You can't get away from it, can you? Sorry. So are there any lessons for communities today? Well, small is beautiful. Appropriate technology gets the job done. These people, their level of technology was, appropriate for the time, and a lot of things were being done at the household level and at the community level. Networks are important. Choose the right connections. People were well connected commercially, buying and selling with different parts of the Aztec Empire, but they were also connected to information networks, style networks. They knew what was going on in other areas. They knew what the styles were. They knew what people were saying and doing. And then local control and flexibility lead to success. I think a lot of the reason that these communities did so well is in a lot of ways they could control what they were doing. People didn't own the land, but the whole land tenure and social system was set up to allow people a lot of sort of local autonomy. And that's the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. I want to invite everybody to put any questions in the chat feature. And Michael, on average, how far down below these households was the bedrock?
Well, in most cases, not very deep. I mean, bedrock, it's a sea horizon. It's called Tepetate in central Mexico. And it was usually not more than, it's much less than a meter. So this was fairly shallow at all of these sites. I mean, Yautepec, we had some deeper deposits because it's a city and, and it's an alluvial context. We had one place, a couple of meters of alluvial deposition, but for the most part, the deposits were pretty shallow.
Alrighty. And Javier in Mexico City, he says, yeah, there are lots of paracaidistas there. They tend to have political power, and it's so hard to remove them, as the professor says. You were a smart professor.
So someone said to me once, some Mexican colleagues, they were saying, you do very well in the politics here. And I was puzzled, and I thought, I stay out of the politics. That's how I do well in the politics. I just stay out of it. But yeah, that was quite a task to deal with. The paracaidistas were affiliated with the PRD, and Yautepec was controlled by the PRI party. And actually the public works department in Yautepec was controlled by the PRD. And the guy in charge of the public works department came around threatening the archaeologists, saying, you don't have a permit to dig here. And without a permit from the public works department, you could go to jail. And he would go threaten my crew chiefs. So they come running to me, blah, 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 blah. And then he gave up, and then he came back 2 months later, and he was my best buddy. Oh, Miguel, how are you doing? And I was very suspicious. And that's when they had found this pavement. He said, hey, we found this pavement, and you got to go tell us, is this an ancient pavement or a modern pavement? And I'm thinking, maybe there is a law against digging in the street. Maybe I'll go to jail. But eventually, he was just, I don't know, had a change of heart, and we did the house in the street. But yeah, politics is. There's a lot of politics in doing archaeology anywhere, but particularly in Mexico today.
Hello, Annabelle.
Hi there. Let's see. Hi, how are you doing?
Came in late, but
Well, we're in Belize.
okay.
We're just trying to figure out how to get things set up.
Alrighty.
Is it late?
Yeah, you're an hour late.
Oh. So, okay, well, I
But
guess I just say hi. We thought we were on time, but I guess
we'll be
not.
posting, we'll be,
I'm not good at time.
you'll get a notice of the recording.
Oh, great.
All right.
Great. I'm so sorry.
All right.
Oh, we
Glad
even were
to
just
know
getting
you're,
everything set up. Well, we'll figure out how to set it up so next time we'll be okay.
but it's glad to know you got your permit and you'll be working down there.
Yeah, I just was down in Belmopan today and what I call the Belmopan Shuffle, and we were able to get our permits and talk to all the right people. It was a good day. Just tiring when you're setting up.
Down there for the Belize Archaeology Symposium.
Yeah, they're drumming up abstracts right now.
And then Michael, was Cindy, has she helped you with your writings? Any of your books or?
Well, Cindy's an editor, and she has edited a lot of my work over the years. And I think I write pretty well for an academic. And when someone tells me my writing is good, I say, well, that's, being married to an editor helps. And, so when I'm writing something, I hear her voice in the background going, that's jargon, or you split infinitive, whatever. I hear her voice, and so when something has to be just right, I let her edit it now, but she doesn't edit my stuff now as much as she used to. But yeah, we met in graduate school. And so, she's been involved in all the projects. Sometimes she's running the lab, sometimes excavating, doing various things.
And did you find out anything about gender relations in these communities?
Yes, that's Helen's question. Hey, find out gender. Well, so what we would do is use information from the written sources about gender in Aztec society to interpret the archaeological remains. So women were the curers, and when we found figurines and incense burners and stuff, then we are assuming that they're probably the domain of women. But we really didn't learn all that much about gender relations that went beyond that. It's sort of limited what we can infer from the written documents. And almost everything we found in these households was in the trash heap behind the household. So we don't have areas, activity areas. We don't have places where individuals might have worked or done things. These houses were kept clean, and material on the house floors. Well, artifacts that we found on the floors of houses was almost entirely things that had been in the adobe bricks. And when the bricks deteriorated, the stuff was deposited on the house floor. So absolutely worthless for interpreting, activities in that house. They told us where they got the bricks. They got the bricks outside in the backyard. So we did not learn all that much about gender relations at these sites.
And then how did the local communities get the fancy goods? Was it just at the local markets, and did every village have markets, rotating markets? Or?
Yeah, well, we infer marketplaces from a couple of ways. One is there's statements that all the towns had markets, and there's some specific descriptions of some of the towns in this area that mention that they had a marketplace in the Aztec period. But more directly is in a market economy, households have access to a wide variety of goods. So there were no fancy goods that nobles had, but commoners didn't. We were able to do that because we had a couple noble houses. We excavated a lot of commoner houses. And, with even the bronze needles or jade beads or, fancy pottery, that would occur in both the noble context and the commoner context. So the nobles had more imports. They had a higher frequency of fancy painted goods. The artifacts, it was a wealthier household assemblage, but the goods weren't exclusively found in noble contexts. So that suggests a market system that if the commoners, had the resources to purchase a jade bead, they could do it. So that's how we think that they came to the market system.
So was this jade from the Montagua, or was it actually serpentine?
Well, jadeite, yeah, technically not jade.
Jadeite, though.
We didn't do source analysis. It's probably from the Motagua. We didn't get a lot of it.
All right, that's interesting. And then, do the Aztec towns have a cargo system now in modern times as government?
Cargo system. Well, I mean, I think that the cargo system is documented in Mesoamerican ethnography is largely a colonial period development. The system where posts are rotated within a village. But even if something like that may have occurred, it would be hard to document archaeologically. It would be hard to be able to show that.
Nadia, your friend Nadia says it's super interesting. Did you find evidence related to the daily life of children?
Not surprised yet. We lived for quite a while with Nadia's parents in Toluca while working at Teotihuacan. I don't. There's nothing that we could say clearly. This is evidence of activities by children. What were figurines? Or you probably used in ceremonies? Maybe I would guess that a lot of toys were perishable, made of perishable materials.
Mm-hmm.
And that we. I don't think there's anything where we can point to and says that's evidence that of activities of children or something by or for children.
And you mentioned some of the building materials. Annan is asking, is it possible to determine roof material from remains of smaller low status residents? Most artistic depictions seem to show angled straw thatch roofs, but I see some, especially of still low class homes in Tenochtitlan, which have flat stone roofs, which I believe also shows up in the conquistadores accounts.
No, we don't have direct evidence for the roofs. I'm basically going on the basis of analogy with contemporary rural houses in this area. We showed that the stone foundation walls were identical. Adobe, we found a few fragments of adobe bricks that hadn't deteriorated. And so we're just making the inference that the kinds of roofs on the contemporary adobe houses were probably what was used in the past as well. But we don't have direct documentation of that. We don't have a case where, roofs fell in and were preserved or something.
Okay, Javier Rayon from Mexico City has raised his hand and he's unmuted himself. He'd like to ask you a question.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Professor. I was surprised when you mentioned at the beginning that there was apparently a few publishers who rejected your original pitch for this book. And I wonder if there's anything that the general public like myself can do in order to show that there's interest in books like this. As you know, I have searched a lot for the daily life of my ancestors, of the Mexica, and it is super hard for me to find. And just like me, I've met a few other people interested. So what can we do so that experts like you can share your findings?
I'm not sure what to say. I mean, it's not just that Okay, I went through, lots of agents rejected it, lots of publishers rejected it. I mean, Barbara Braun is a New York agent. She shopped it to all the major publishers, Norton and Random House, and she shared their communications. She'd, send it to the acquisitions editor, and they would come back and say, this looks really interesting. I'd love to read this book, but the marketing people say it's not going to sell enough. So it ended up with Routledge, and they treated it like a technical book and charged $45 for a thin book. And they're not marketing it, they're marketing it like a technical book. And I don't know what to, how to promote. It's tough. Writing a good book for a general audience is tough. There's bad books for a general audience, and people don't know what the hell they're talking about, write books. And, and the payoff isn't great. I don't mean the monetary payoff, but the scholarly payoff. It's, if I'm going to write a book and I'm, trying to get tenure as a professor, a technical book would count much more than a general audience book. I felt I could do this because, I was a full professor. I got tenure. I'm not worried about that kind of thing. And I don't know what to tell you.
Well, maybe it is a dialogue that can evolve, and if there's anything that we can do, let's say general public here in Mexico who want to read about this, well, I'd be happy to continue attending lectures and buying the books and recommending them when they appear.
Well, thank you. Excellent. I mean, there is an audience, the Arqueología Mexicana has a wide subscription.
Yeah.
And that's where quality archaeology gets distributed to a broad audience, and that's a very nice magazine. And I think the quality is certainly higher than Archaeology magazine in the U.S. or National Geographic.
Wow.
Yeah. Arqueología Mexicana is really quite good.
Thank you, Professor. I'll continue appreciating that magazine and your publications now that I know that.
And Anon is regarding this outreach for the publications. He thinks it's a potential good avenue is social media. And there are a lot of people, especially young adults and teens, who consume information and media primarily through online, working with established YouTube channels that focusing on history and archaeology may be fruitful.
Well, again, it's a question of time. I mean, I'm on Twitter, pretty active on Twitter. And I look at that as an outreach activity, and but it's easy to do. I'm not don't spend hours, but if I was going to do a series of videos on YouTube, well, that's, that takes a lot more preparation and higher technical, the technical values to get something that's going to look good, that people are going to pay attention to. And I actually started a series on ancient cities, and I got as far as one video. I keep saying, well, maybe I'll get back to it. That shouldn't be too hard. I teach about that. I can, I was coming out of my class, that series, but it's tough.
All right, John Carson's unmuted himself and he'd like to ask you a question. Go ahead, John. Well, maybe he's walked away from his.
Well, his question about looking at comparative archaeological work around in the Aztec Empire, and yeah, I mean, I've done a fair amount of that, and my student Angela Huster actually went beyond what I've done, assembling quantitative data from lots of archaeological reports and papers in order to look at patterns of trade and craft production throughout the Aztec Empire. So, she has a number of papers, technical papers on that I'd highly recommend.
Alrighty, and what percentage of the kitchens and cooking areas found? Are they within the living areas or as opposed to in the patios outside?
Good question. We did not find specific kitchen areas. And so food must have been prepared either in the patio area or maybe in the house or maybe with a portable grill, as at Teotihuacan, but we didn't find specific hearth areas preserved. So it's hard to say exactly where they were. I mean, every structure around the patios seemed to be a residential structure. You know, we didn't have like, a lot of the Maya patio groups, you'd have a residential structure and a shrine and a kitchen maybe. And they all had basic suite of domestic artifacts outside of them. They were all similar architecturally. It was a series of individual household dwellings. But exactly where they were preparing their food is not clear. Now, let me mention this, at Teotihuacan, they did not find hearths either. And one guy suggested in the 1950s that, oh, they cooked the food in rural areas and brought it into town. Now think about it. There's 100,000 people in Teotihuacan. That's a lot of tacos to go. No, they did not cook the food in rural areas. So it turns out the Teotihuacan had these little hibachi things, little portable grills, ceramic grills. So that was not going to leave. It's not a built-in hearth in the apartment compounds. Now maybe we didn't find this kind of portable grill at the Aztec site. So I think there must have been, I suspect the kitchens were outside, under a temporary roof or ramada kind of thing. But we didn't find the direct evidence.
And have you considered publication of this book in Spanish?
Yeah, but it's the way the publishing world works is that's not my decision. The publisher sells the rights to a publisher who wants to publish a translation. I spent a lot of effort over the years to try to get my textbook, The Aztecs, published in Spanish. And what you could get in Mexico in Spanish is translations of books from that were 40 years old. Sustel and its old stuff. And the publisher claims they couldn't get interest. I tried going through some Mexican colleagues who talked to publishers. I don't know. I would think it would be possible to do a translation that it might sell in Mexico, but have not been successful with that.
Mark Van Stone highly recommends self-publishing with print on demand.
Well, that has its advantages too. I mean, the marketing is not as good, but yeah, that definitely has its advantages.
And Mark has a new book coming out, and I noticed some of the ceramic pieces that you showed were probably from molds and reproduced through molds and traded with the general population. And his book is about Maya molds and production, and it'll be coming out in the next month or so. But Christian Torres has his hand up and he's unmuted and would like to ask your question. Go ahead, Christian.
Sure.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm kind of curious as far as, finding a lot of the materials. I'm kind of curious, outside of pulque or mushrooms, do you know other substances that were common in those times as far as psychedelic or alcoholic, what other things that might not be as commonly known to most people?
Well, for psychedelics, I really have no idea. We have several kinds of specialized drinking cups. And we think that one of them seems to be related to cacao,
Mm.
and it's possible the others were pulque, or maybe there was some mixture of the two. Now, these sites in Morelos are too low in elevation, so the maguey pulque is made from didn't grow. But other sites we excavated at Teotihuacan near Toluca is definitely in a maguey area, and pulque is still produced today. We had the goblets that I'm pretty sure were used for cacao. We wanted to get them tested, the Hershey's labs tested Maya vases, but they weren't interested at the time, and so we never got that done. But there's these sort of goblets, look like a brandy snifter, sort of a globular goblet with a ring base on it, and there's some images in the codices of cacao in vases like that, and we found those in households in Yautepec, but never actually tested them chemically.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And Mary Hopkins has her hand up, and she's unmuted. Go ahead, Mary.
Hi, thanks, Mike. A really interesting talk. One of the things that I wonder about, thinking about evidence for where cooking was done, I think I'm not sure that we have a way of addressing. Maybe there was cultural variability in how specifically domestic space was used. There certainly is that if you look at cultures in the area today. I'm not sure, looking back, if we have picked that up, but it's worth looking at. Portable braziers kind of throw a loop into that. But there are other things that could be looked for. I'm not sure if they have been, to tell you the truth. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, it was sort of frustrating after reading accounts of excavations of Flannery and Marcus in Oaxaca and other places where there's house floor remains are preserved, and you could reconstruct different things within the house and outside the house, and basically anything in a house there had nothing to do with what happened in that house. And outside we had a couple of offerings and a few deposits exterior, that was a deposit in a place where something happened, but for the most part they were sort of just middens and trash heaps. It was you're right, there could very easily be variation in how people are cooking and arranging a lot of these activities, and at these sites we just wouldn't know. While we were excavating these sites, getting little potsherds on the floor of the house, which came out of the adobe, up the hill on Xochicalco, there was an excavation going on, and Xochicalco was abandoned in a big hurry. And they had an excavation, and every house there had, the water jars in the corner and the metates over there, and they could reconstruct, what was going on in houses because the artifacts were all right where they had been. And, and we parked at Xochicalco and walked down the hill to these sites. And so we go see these excavations going, man, they can, really reconstruct what's going on in those houses. And we got this just crummy, everything's in the midden. That's all we had. So.